The wind howled through the ancient pines, their branches clawing at the moonlit sky like skeletal fingers. In the heart of the dark forest stood an old, decrepit mansion, its once grandiose facade now a crumbling shadow of its former self. Inside, shadows danced on the walls, their eerie movements betraying the presence of something far more sinister than the house's dilapidated state. Drive. Emily Carson, a renowned hematologist, had been summoned to the estate under mysterious circumstances. The letter she received was cryptic, signed only with the initials L.V., and promising answers to questions she had long sought about a rare blood disorder, porphyria. Her curiosity piqued. She ventured into the depths of the forest, the mansion's foreboding silhouette drawing closer with every step. The door creaked open as she approached, seemingly of its own accord. She hesitated, a shiver running down her spine, but the lure of scientific discovery was too strong to resist. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of decay and the faint, metallic tang of blood. Her footsteps echoed through the empty halls, each one a hollow reminder of the mansion's long-forgotten splendor. In the grand parlor, she found him waiting. Lucien Voss, a man whose age was impossible to determine, stood by the fireplace, his pale skin almost luminous in the firelight. His eyes, dark and piercing, seemed to see straight through her. "Dr. Carson," he said, his voice a silken whisper, "thank you for coming. I trust your journey was uneventful." Emily nodded, unable to shake the feeling of being watched by unseen eyes. "Your letter mentioned porphyria. What can you tell me about it?" Lucien smiled, revealing teeth that were just a little too sharp. Porphyria, as you know, is a hereditary blood disease. It manifests in various ways, but the most telling symptoms are sensitivity to sunlight, severe abdominal pain, and neurological complications. In some cases, it can cause a person to appear quite ghastly pale skin, red or brown urine, and even an aversion to garlic. He paused, his gaze locking onto hers. "But there is more, much more, to this disease than your medical texts reveal. It is not merely a disorder of the blood. It is a curse, a dark gift passed down through generations. Those who suffer from it. We are not like you." A chill ran down Emily's spine. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Lucien stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "I mean, Dr. Carson, that porphyria is not just the basis of the vampire legend, it is the reality. We are the progenitors of those myths, the creatures of the night who must feed on the blood of the living to survive. And you, my dear doctor, have been chosen to join us." Before she could react, Lucien's hand shot out, cold fingers encircling her wrist. Panic surged through her as she struggled to break free, but his grip was like iron. His eyes bore into hers, and she felt a strange, hypnotic pull, a darkness that seemed to consume her very soul. "Embrace your destiny, Emily," he whispered, his breath cold against her skin. "Join us, and you will know the true power of the night." In the distance, a wolf howled, its mournful cry echoing through the forest. Emily's heart pounded in her chest as the world around her began to blur, the shadows closing in. She could feel the transformation beginning, a creeping, insidious change that would bind her to this ancient, cursed lineage for eternity. Just as she was about to succumb to the darkness, a sudden crash shattered the oppressive silence. The door to the parlor flew open, and a figure stood silhouetted against the moonlight, a wooden stake in hand. "Let her go, Lucien," the stranger commanded, their voice filled with steely resolve. "This ends tonight," Lucien hissed, his eyes flashing with anger and fear. Emily's vision cleared just enough to see the face of her would-be savior, a face that seemed hauntingly familiar. The figure in the doorway stepped forward, their presence a stark contrast to the oppressive gloom that filled the parlor. Lucien's grip tightened on Emily's wrist, his sharp nails digging into her skin. She winced but couldn't tear her eyes away from the newcomer. "Who are you?" Lucien demanded, his voice a low growl. His eyes never left the intruder, but Emily could sense his fear, palpable in the tension of his body. The stranger stepped into the light, revealing a tall, imposing figure dressed in dark, practical clothing. A hood cast shadows over their face, but as they lowered it, Emily gasped. It was her father, Dr. Thomas Carson, whom she believed had died years ago. "Father," she whispered, her voice trembling with shock and confusion. "How?" "There's no time to explain, Emily," her father interrupted, his gaze hard and determined. "I've been hunting Lucien and his kind for years. When I learned he had taken an interest in you, I knew I had to come back. You were never meant to be a part of this." Lucian sneered, baring his fangs. "So, the legendary vampire hunter returns from the dead. How touching. But you are too late, Thomas. She is mine now." Thomas brandished the wooden stake, his grip steady. "Not if I have anything to say about it." With a speed that defied logic, Thomas lunged at Lucian. The two men clashed in a blur of movement, a deadly dance of strength and agility. Emily watched, paralyzed by fear and disbelief, as her father fought with a ferocity she had never seen before. The parlor was filled with the sound of breaking furniture and shattering glass as their battle raged on. "Emily, run!" Thomas shouted, his voice strained as he struggled to hold Lucian at bay. "Get out of here." But Emily couldn't move. Her mind was a whirl of conflicting emotions: fear, anger, confusion, and a strange, unsettling hunger that gnawed at her insides. She stumbled backward, clutching her head as the pain intensified. Her vision blurred, and she felt herself teetering on the edge of consciousness. Suddenly, Lucian broke free from Thomas's grasp, his eyes wild with rage. He moved toward Emily with predatory grace, his intentions clear. "You cannot escape your fate, Emily. You belong to us now." Before he could reach her, Thomas intervened, tackling Lucian to the ground. They grappled fiercely, and for a moment, it seemed as if Thomas might gain the upper hand. But Lucian was stronger, his centuries-old power overwhelming. With a swift, brutal motion, he threw Thomas across the room, where he crashed into a bookcase and lay still. Lucian rose, blooded but victorious. He turned to Emily, his eyes burning with an unholy light. "Now, where were we?" Emily backed away, her mind racing. She knew she couldn't fight him, not in her current state. But as she glanced around the room, her eyes fell on a small vial of liquid lying among the debris. She recognized it instantly. It was a serum her father had been working on, a potential cure for porphyria. With desperate determination, she grabbed the vial and hurled it at Lucian. It shattered against his chest, the liquid sizzling as it made contact with his skin. He screamed, a sound of pure agony, and fell to his knees, clutching at his chest. Emily seized the opportunity and ran to her father. He was conscious but weak, his face pale and drawn. "Father, we have to go," she urged, helping him to his feet. Thomas nodded weakly, his eyes filled with pain. "The back door. Hurry." Supporting her father, Emily stumbled through the mansion, the sounds of Lucian's enraged howls echoing behind them. They burst out into the night, the cool air a stark contrast to the suffocating heat of the parlor. Emily's heart pounded as they made their way to a waiting car hidden in the shadows. As they drove away, Emily glanced back at the mansion, its dark silhouette looming ominously against the moonlit sky. She knew this was far from over. Lucian would come for them, and there were others like him, ancient, powerful beings who would stop at nothing to reclaim what they believed was theirs. In the silence of the car, Thomas spoke, his voice a mere whisper. "Emily, there is so much you don't know. About me, about our family. We are part of this world, whether we like it or not. But we have a chance to change things, to fight back." Emily nodded, her mind still reeling. "What do we do now?" Thomas looked at her, his eyes filled with a resolve that mirrored her own. "We find the others, those who can help us. We prepare for what's coming. This is just the beginning." As they disappeared into the night, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that their journey had only just begun. The darkness that lay ahead was filled with danger and uncertainty, but she knew one thing for certain: they would face it together. The car sped through the winding forest road, the headlights piercing the inky blackness. Emily's mind raced, trying to process the whirlwind of events. Her father, Thomas, was alive and a vampire hunter. Lucian, the enigmatic figure, was a vampire intent on claiming her. And now, they were on the run, with the promise of more horrors to come. "Where are we going?" Emily asked, her voice trembling. Thomas, despite his injuries, managed to smile. "To an old ally of mine, someone who can help us and provide answers." They drove for hours, the forest gradually giving way to rolling hills and misty valleys. Dawn began to break, casting a soft, golden light over the landscape. Emily glanced at her father, noting the deep lines etched into his face, the weariness in his eyes. He had been through so much, and yet here he was, fighting to protect her. As the sun climbed higher, they arrived at a secluded estate nestled among the hills. The house was imposing yet elegant, with tall windows and ivy-covered walls. Thomas parked the car and turned to Emily. "Stay close and trust me," he said. "This place is safe." They approached the massive wooden door, and Thomas knocked in a peculiar rhythm. Moments later, it creaked open, revealing a stern-looking woman with piercing blue eyes and silver-streaked hair. She studied them for a moment before nodding. "Thomas, it's been too long," she said, stepping aside to let them in. "And you must be Emily. Welcome." Inside, the house was a stark contrast to the dark, oppressive mansion they had fled. It was filled with light and warmth, antique furniture, and walls lined with bookshelves. The woman led them to a spacious sitting room, where a fire crackled in the hearth. "Thank you, Celeste," Thomas said, sinking into an armchair. "We need your help. Lucian found us." Celeste nodded gravely. "I heard rumors he was stirring, but I didn't expect him to act so quickly." She turned to Emily. "You're safe here. Lucian and his ilk cannot enter this house. It's protected by ancient wards." Emily sat down, her legs weak with relief. "Thank you. But what do we do now? How do we stop him?" Celeste exchanged a glance with Thomas before speaking. "Lucian is part of a larger coven, one of the oldest and most powerful. To defeat him, we must understand his weaknesses and find allies willing to stand against him. There are others like your father and me, hunters and scholars, who have dedicated their lives to fighting these creatures." Thomas leaned forward, his expression intense. "Emily, there's something you need to know. Our family has a history with vampires. My great-grandfather was one of the first to document porphyria and its connection to vampirism. Our bloodline is special, and that's why Lucian is so interested in you." Emily's mind reeled. "Special how?" "Our blood can either cure or enhance the vampiric condition," Celeste explained. "It has unique properties that can turn the tide in this war. That's why Lucian wants you to harness your blood for his own ends." A sense of dread settled over Emily. "So, what now? How do we prepare?" "We train," Thomas said firmly. "We find others who can help us, and we learn everything we can about Lucian's coven. Knowledge is our greatest weapon." Over the next few days, Emily immersed herself in training and research. Celeste proved to be a skilled mentor, teaching her the arts of self-defense and ancient rituals. Thomas delved into his vast collection of texts, searching for any information that might give them an edge. As she trained, Emily discovered latent abilities she never knew she possessed: heightened senses, quick reflexes, and a strange ability to sense the presence of vampires. These newfound skills both frightened and fascinated her. One evening, while poring over an old journal in the library, she stumbled upon a passage that caught her eye. It spoke of an artifact, a relic said to have the power to destroy vampires. The artifact, known as the Bloodstone, was hidden away centuries ago by a secret order of hunters. Emily's heart raced as she read on. The journal contained a rough map leading to the Bloodstone's location, deep within the Carpathian Mountains. She knew this could be the key to their victory. She rushed to find her father and Celeste, the journal clutched in her hands. "I found something," she said breathlessly. "An artifact that can destroy vampires. It's called the Bloodstone, and there's a map to its location." Thomas and Celeste exchanged hopeful looks. "If the Bloodstone is real, it could be the weapon we need," Celeste said. "But the journey will be perilous. The Carpathians are treacherous, and Lucian will likely sense our quest." "We have to try," Thomas said, determination in his eyes. "This is our best chance." As they prepared for the journey, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Shadows seemed to move on their own, and she often felt an eerie presence just out of sight. One night, as she lay in bed, a whispering voice filled her mind. "You cannot escape your fate, Emily. The Bloodstone will be your doom." She sat up, drenched in sweat, her heart pounding. The voice was unmistakable. It was Lucian. Morning came, and they set out on their journey, the map leading them through dense forests and rugged terrain. The closer they got to their destination, the more Emily felt the oppressive weight of Lucian's presence. He was watching, waiting. After days of arduous travel, they reached the entrance to an ancient cave, hidden high in the mountains. The air was thick with anticipation and fear as they ventured inside, the darkness swallowing them whole. The cave was a labyrinth of tunnels and chambers, each more treacherous than the last. Strange symbols adorned the walls, and the air was filled with an otherworldly hum. Emily led the way, her senses guiding her through the maze. Finally, they reached a vast chamber, at the center of which stood an ornate pedestal. Atop it rested the bloodstone, its crimson surface pulsing with an eerie light. As Emily approached, the ground trembled, and a voice echoed through the chamber. "You have done well to come this far, but your journey ends here." Lucian emerged from the shadows, his eyes gleaming with malice. "The bloodstone is mine." Thomas and Celeste moved to protect Emily, weapons drawn. "You'll have to go through us," Thomas said defiantly. Lucian laughed, a chilling sound that reverberated through the chamber. "So be it." The final battle had begun, and Emily knew that the outcome would determine the fate of not just her family, but the world itself. As she grasped the bloodstone, a surge of power coursed through her, and she realized that she held the key to ending Lucian's reign of terror. But with the power came a terrible choice, one that could save or damn them all. The air in the cavern grew colder, and the hum of ancient power became deafening as Lucian and his minions closed in. Emily clutched the bloodstone, feeling its dark energy pulse through her veins. Beside her, Thomas and Celeste readied themselves for the fight of their lives, their faces grim but resolute. Lucian's eyes gleamed with triumph as he stepped forward, flanked by his loyal followers. "You cannot win," he hissed. "The bloodstone belongs to me, and with it, I will be unstoppable." Thomas lunged at Lucian, his stake aimed at the vampire's heart. But Lucian was faster, sidestepping the attack and striking Thomas with a brutal backhand that sent him crashing to the ground. Celeste engaged two of Lucian's minions, her movements a blur of skill and ferocity, but she was outnumbered and quickly overpowered. Emily watched in horror as her father lay motionless, blood trickling from a wound on his temple. Celeste fought valiantly, but a vicious strike to her abdomen brought her to her knees. Lucian's followers closed in, their eyes hungry for blood. Desperation fueled Emily's actions as she raised the bloodstone high, its crimson glow intensifying. "Stop!" she screamed, her voice echoing through the cavern. "I'll destroy it." Lucian's eyes narrowed, his expression darkening. "You wouldn't dare." Emily hesitated, the weight of her decision bearing down on her. Destroying the bloodstone could save them, but the power it contained was seductive, promising strength and the means to end Lucian's reign once and for all. She felt the stone's energy coursing through her, whispering of untold power and the ability to shape her own destiny. Lucian took advantage of her hesitation, lunging forward and seizing her wrist. His grip was like iron, and she felt the crushing pressure as he forced her hand downward. "You are too weak," he taunted. "You cannot defeat me." Emily struggled, but Lucian's strength was overwhelming. He twisted her arm, forcing the bloodstone from her grasp. It fell to the ground, its glow dimming as it skittered across the cavern floor. Lucian's followers closed in, restraining her as she fought to break free. Thomas stirred, his eyes fluttering open. He saw his daughter in Lucian's grip and struggled to rise, but his injuries were too severe. "Emily, no," he gasped, his voice barely a whisper. Lucian bent down, picking up the bloodstone. "Now, you will witness true power," he said, a cruel smile spreading across his face. He raised the stone high, its glow returning with a fierce intensity. Emily watched in helpless terror as Lucian chanted in an ancient, guttural language. The bloodstone pulsed, its light growing brighter and more ominous. The cavern shook, and an unnatural wind howled through the tunnels. With a final, triumphant cry, Lucian brought the bloodstone crashing down onto the pedestal. A blinding flash of light filled the chamber, followed by a deafening roar. The ground split open, and dark tendrils of energy erupted from the fissure, enveloping Lucian and his followers. Emily screamed as the tendrils wrapped around her, their touch searing her flesh. She felt her strength draining away, her vision dimming. In her final moments, she saw her father reaching out to her, his face etched with despair. The cavern collapsed around them, the ancient structure unable to contain the unleashed power. Rocks and debris rained down, burying them all in darkness. Lucian emerged from the wreckage, his eyes burning with a new, terrible power. The bloodstone had transformed him, merging with his very essence. He looked down at the remains of his foes, a sense of hollow victory settling over him. The world above remained blissfully unaware of the new terror that had been unleashed. Lucian's reign of darkness had only just begun, and there would be no one left to stand in his way. In the end, the price of power had been too great. Emily and her family had fought valiantly, but the darkness had won. Lucian's laughter echoed through the night, a chilling reminder that sometimes the shadows cannot be overcome. The end.